I moved into Laneway Towers about a year ago. It wasn't my first choice. The building was old, the kind where the windows rattled when the wind blew too hard, and the elevators groaned like they had seen better days decades ago. The carpets in the hallways were a faded shade of gray, stained in spots where the building's history had seeped into the fabric. The walls were cracked, peeling in places, and the entire structure had a musty, ancient smell that seemed to stick to your clothes no matter how hard you tried to wash it off. But it was affordable, and after a messy breakup, I wasn't in a position to be picky. I needed a roof over my head, and fast. The apartment was small, barely enough room for a couch, a bed, and my things, but it was mine. Or at least, I told myself that. The landlord didn't ask many questions, and neither did the neighbors. It seemed perfect for someone who wanted to disappear. At first, I liked the anonymity. No one bothered you here. No intrusive knocks on the door. No curious neighbors peeking into your life. Just me, my tiny apartment, and the slow, rhythmic ticking of the days passing by. I settled into a comfortable routine. Wake up at noon, go to work at night, and then sleep through the daylight hours. It was all monotonous, but it was manageable. It was enough. I worked nights, managing inventory for a warehouse across town. Most of my shifts ended around 3 a.m., when the streets were mostly empty and the city seemed to hold its breath. I would walk home through the quiet streets, tired and worn from the shift, only to reach the dim-lit Laneway Towers and slip into the shadowy halls. The air smelled of dust, the walls echoing the faint creaks and groans of a building that was slowly dying. But it was on one of those nights when things started to feel off. I had just finished a long shift, feeling the familiar ache in my feet, and I made my way to the elevator. The lights flickered above me as I pressed the button to go up to my floor. The elevator doors opened with a creak, and I stepped inside. But as the doors closed behind me, I noticed something strange. The elevator stopped on the 10th floor before heading to mine. It wasn't just a passing glitch, it happened every single night. The elevator would always stop at the 10th floor, the doors opening to a pitch-black hallway. The floors above and below were lit, but that floor, it was a void, a black hole in the building's heart, and no one ever got in or out. At first, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was just another quirk of this ancient building. Maybe the wiring was faulty, or the sensors were on the fritz. But over time, the strange occurrence became harder to ignore. There was something about the 10th floor that seemed off. I started to feel it in my bones, that uneasy sensation that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Every time the elevator stopped on that floor, I couldn't help but feel a slight, lingering dread, like something was waiting just out of sight. It wasn't just the elevator. There was the silence, too. It was like the entire floor was sealed off from the rest of the building, caught in some timeless moment where nothing could move or change. The air felt thick and stagnant, like the kind of place where time went to die. One night, exhausted and sick of the growing tension, I got in the elevator, hit the button for my floor, and leaned against the cold metal wall trying to push the thoughts from my head. I tried to ignore the creeping dread that had been steadily growing, but I couldn't help it. When we reached the 10th floor, the elevator doors didn't open immediately. There was a pause, a hesitation. Then they slid open with a sound that seemed louder than it should have been. The hallway beyond was dark, too dark. Darker than the usual dim lighting of the building, and I could feel it. The weight of that silence pressing in, suffocating. The smell of dust and rot lingered in the air. I could almost taste it, sharp and sour in the back of my throat. I could hear something. Faint, a sound like footsteps shuffling, dragging slowly across the floor. My heart skipped a beat, my breath catching in my throat. I knew I wasn't alone on that floor. Someone was there. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen in place. And then I saw it. A shadow flicker at the end of the hallway. It was small, barely visible at first, but as it moved, I could make out the form of a person. A hunched figure, too still and too silent, standing in the gloom at the far end of the corridor. Before I could blink, the figure was gone, disappearing into the blackness as quickly as it had appeared. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt a rush of heat flood my face as I fumbled for the elevator button. The doors finally closed, and I breathed a sigh of relief, my chest heaving as the elevator continued its slow ascent to my floor. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. It lingered in the corners of my mind, gnawing at me. Something was wrong with that floor. Something had happened there. And whatever it was, it hadn't left. Curiosity got the best of me. I started asking around. Casual questions, nothing too direct, just trying to get a feel for the place. Everyone was tight-lipped, but there were whispers. Strange stories that made my skin crawl when I pieced them together. Mr. Henderson, an old man who lived on the floor below mine, had lived in the building for decades. When I asked him about the 10th floor, his expression darkened. He was quiet for a long time, staring at the floor as if the very mention of it disturbed him. Finally, he muttered, "You shouldn't go up there, not at night. Don't go looking for trouble." I pressed a little further, but he only shook his head, muttering something about the family that had lived there years ago. He wouldn't say more. Another tenant, Mrs. Rodriguez, the woman who lived across from me, was even more cryptic. When I casually mentioned the 10th floor, she glanced nervously at the door, as if expecting someone to overhear. "It's not a place you want to know about," she said softly. "Things happen there, things that shouldn't." The final piece of the puzzle came when I decided to do some research. The building had been around for decades, and it was clear it had a history. What I found, however, was far more disturbing than I could have imagined. 30 years ago, a family had lived on the 10th floor. A mother, a father, and their son, Daniel. One evening, Daniel was playing in the hall when he stepped into the elevator to go down to meet his mom, but the elevator never made it to the lobby. The footage from the security cameras showed the doors closing, the elevator rising to the 10th floor, and then nothing. The boy had vanished without a trace. The parents had searched frantically, but the building's tenants remained silent. The floor was sealed off, and the building seemed to have erased the memory of the child ever existing. But something lingered. Something dark. I could feel the pull, an undeniable urge to go up to that floor, to confront whatever had been left behind. I couldn't stop myself. One night, I took the elevator up to the 10th floor. I told myself it was just curiosity, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. The elevator doors opened with a familiar groan, and the dark hallway stretched out before me. The air was colder than usual, sharp like ice on my skin. The lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows across the floor. I stepped off the elevator, my footsteps muffled by the worn carpet beneath me. At the end of the hallway was an apartment. Apartment 1006. The door was ajar, just slightly, as though it had been waiting for me. A flickering blue light spilled from within, casting long, trembling shadows. I couldn't turn back. I had to see. I stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Thick, suffocating. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. The apartment was dark, save for the TV that was on, showing nothing but static. I could see a small figure sitting in front of the screen. The figure was hunched over, its back to me. It was rocking slowly, back and forth, as if in some kind of trance. Suddenly, the figure turned and I saw it. A boy. A small boy, but not the boy I'd expected. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and there was something wrong with them. They didn't look like normal eyes. They were too dark, too empty. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered, his voice a rasp that sent chills down my spine. The static on the TV grew louder, more aggressive, drowning out the boy's voice. I turned to leave, but my body wouldn't move. It felt like something was holding me in place, and then a whisper. "Stay." I didn't know how long I stood there, trapped in that nightmare. All I remember is the cold, the oppressive silence, and the feeling that something was waiting, watching. Finally, I broke free, running to the elevator, slamming the button over and over. The doors finally opened, and I stumbled inside, gasping for air. As the doors closed, I saw it. A pale hand, too long, reaching out from the darkness, and then a voice, so soft, so close it made my skin crawl. "Why did you leave me?" I never went back to Laneway Towers. I moved out, checked into a motel far from that place, but no matter where I went, the elevator kept calling. Late at night, I would hear it, the soft chime, the sound of the doors opening, waiting for someone foolish enough to step inside. I thought I'd left it all behind. But one night, I received a voicemail. It was from an unknown number. I pressed play. There was only breathing. Soft, labored breathing, like someone was standing too close to the phone. And then the same voice, cold and whispering. "Why did you leave me?" Laneway Towers is still standing, and so is the elevator, stopping at the 10th floor. Waiting, always waiting.